My brother and I don't disagree on many movies, but when we do, it's kind of a doozy. And lately, we've disagreed a lot. And the first movie that we really kind of butted heads on was this French movie called The Class, which is a very highly acclaimed movie. It won Palme d'Or, Best Picture, Best Foreign Film at the Academy Awards, things like that. And I hated it. I just seriously hated it. And I'm not going to go into too much of a review, probably because it's not fair for me to review the film because I didn't finish it. I couldn't finish it. It actually holds a distinction of being one of the few movies that I could not bear to sit through. It was that boring. And I basically described the movie. I was like, look, it's basically just a single camera sitting in a classroom as this guy gives his class. I mean, it's very aptly named, but it is fucking dull. And he goes, well, yeah, that's kind of the point. And I was like, that's not a movie. That is so, it's just nothing happens in this movie. The first act is basically a grammar lesson, you know. Maybe it translates better into French. I don't know. But he said, he's like, it's a kind of a slice of life picture. I was like, you should audit in English as a second language course at ASU or something. It would blow your fucking mind. You know, just go back to school if that fascinates you. But anyway, pardon me. He rented a couple other movies that he brought home, and he expressed a very vocal dislike for both of them. And so I thought I would watch them because, hell, you know, worth a shot. And I've been meaning to see these movies, kind of. The first movie is Angels and Demons, which is, of course, the sequel to The Da Vinci Code, a movie that I did not like, and Miles liked quite a lot. And so I did not have any interest in watching this one, especially in the theater, but I thought I might rent it. I don't know why I didn't like The Da Vinci Code. It's not because I found it offensive or that I didn't like Dan Brown's novel. I actually thought the novel, while not great, was a decent enough page-turner. And in that regard, I think Angels and Demons is actually a far better movie, if only because I think it's a far better story than The Da Vinci Code. I think the weakness of The Da Vinci Code was just that there was this big conspiracy story, this big treasure hunt, and it all didn't really add up to much. I always thought, like, this big secret of the Catholic Church, this secret that they are supposedly willing to kill for, this gigantic secret wasn't really all that much of a secret. I mean, people were kind of, I think they even admit in the book that people were kind of already pitching this idea around. It was just like the final proof. Like, if anyone ever found proof of this big secret, then, well, like, the whole religion would just come tumbling down, like, worlds would collide, wars would start, this religion would implode upon itself, and I didn't see that. Why, at best, like, let's just say they found this proof, Langdon found this hidden secret of Jesus Christ, and brought it to light, and it was like, this is irrefutable proof that so-and-so and so, and your religion is a lie, and they'd be like, okay, look, you know, dogma changes all the time. The things that even the Catholic religion believes in is very malleable and changeable. I mean, essentially, things change all the time. Well, not all the time, you know, especially with the Catholic religion, very rarely. But what I mean is, if the Pope says it, it is so. And so, you know, sometimes the Catholic Church does complete 180s on certain types of things. Things, you know, religion evolves. Catholicism tends to evolve rather slowly, but even so, it evolves. And so, you know, this big secret coming to light, I just thought, you know, what's the point? Are they really willing to kill over this? If it did come to light, it would be at best laughed off as any kind of conspiracy theory or page-turner fiction. Like, you know, if this big secret came out, it would be no more plausible than the Da Vinci Code itself, you know, the novel. So, but with Angels and Demons, I thought it did have the same weaknesses, but I also thought at its core, it had a much better story. And in fact, I thought the story was so good that it really cast into light what was weak about both stories. And I know I'm kind of rambling and not making much sense, but I'll try to explain. I thought I was really entertained by this movie and really drawn into it, more so than I thought I would be. And I realized why that was when I started to realize why I was getting bored about 2/3 of the way through. And I realized that I didn't really care about all this treasure hunty stuff, you know, like this whole national treasure, gallivanting around and solving like these really kind of bullshitty hidden puzzles that were really dealing with a lot of historical inaccuracy and like, you know, hidden watermarks and secret decrypty messages and things like that. I think at its core, Angels and Demons had a really good mystery to it, or at least like a really good crime. And I know you might call bullshit on the implausibility of even the crime, but, you know, as it goes with these big conspiracy stories or a crime story about how one might usurp control of a major religion or something like that, I thought this was actually very well crafted. And again, that did have weaknesses as well, but I'll kind of explain in a second. I thought the story was good enough that it didn't really need this really labyrinthine historical plot. I think a really good story could have been crafted around the central crime, and I know I'm not making much sense, but it kind of there's so many scenes where it gets really dragged down with Langdon driving around, you know, looking at a map, going, you know, we have to find the first marker, and they go to this church, and they're like, oh, where's the marker? It's been hundreds of years, it can't possibly still exist, and they find the statue, and he puts it all together, and he's like, wait a minute, that statue's finger is pointing east, and he's like, give me a map, and he looks at the church where he's at. He draws a line east. He's like, how many churches are on this line directly east from the Vatican? And the statue's pointing this way. And so he does this thing where he's like, okay, he starts putting these clues together, and he's circling points on the map. And of course, in every major little treasure hunt movie, there's this point where they're like, okay, we got all these points in the map, and what if we drew a line where they all cross? And where they all cross is where we have to go. And, you know, they all go there, and they dig through catacombs, and they flip this casket aside, and they, you know, find another clue in there. And it was like, it all gets kind of tedious, because I've seen this kind of movie time and time again. And what was really interesting to me was this crime story about how this guy was kind of manipulating the rules of the Vatican and things like that to accomplish his own ends. And that was a much more interesting story that didn't really require this treasure hunty stuff. And where am I going with this? Even I don't know. At the same time, though, I was so entertained with this film just watching I gotta say, it's beautiful cinematography, the absolute gorgeous location shooting. I got such a kick out of like watching all these really strange and wild and wonderful locations in the Vatican and Rome and things like that. It really took your breath away to see all these really cool places. And I think it's a real credit to basically every technical aspect of this film, that the film is as exciting as it is. And by that I mean the score by Hans Zimmer is really thrilling, heavy, intense, and in many cases too intense. I remember there's a couple scenes where they're just kind of like walking down a street, or they're walking down like an alley, or they're investigating kind of a dark corridor, and Hans Zimmer's music is just like beating you up. It's like, you know, very Carmina Burana style, like loud chorus music, and you're like, okay, dude, chill, they're just walking down a corridor. However, at the same time, you have to realize that, especially in the context of a Dan Brown novel, a story based around Robert Langdon, who is a symbologist, an academic type guy, who spends most of his time reading, and if he's not reading, he's writing about what he just read, that it is not a very exciting type of guy, you know. And to make this kind of intellectual character exciting is very, very difficult. And so, like I said in my review of New Moon, where the score can really sap energy out of the proceedings, Hans Zimmer's score really puts energy into it. And energy at all times is what this movie desperately, desperately needs. And even then, it sometimes fails, like I said, with the treasure hunting parts, and with these really long stretches of exposition where they're kind of putting these really obscure chains of clues together, like, who's the sculptor of this statue, and we have to find more sculptures of this guy. And like a major plot device, I mean, not a plot device, but a major plot point of this movie is Langdon finally gets access to the Vatican archives, where he's going to read a book. And you're like, woo! And so he's like, I have to find this sculptor and find all the works this sculptor ever did, and the basilicas he's put these statues in, and like, who redecorated this place in 1855, and and so you're like, oh, boring. And so, the score really keeps you interested. The acting at all times is top-notch. Tom Hanks manages to make a relatively... In fact, that's actually a weakness of the character of Langdon, is we really learn nothing about Langdon in the entire course of the movie, except that he's not really that religious. I mean, this guy is basically a one-dimensional nerd who spouts off exposition when necessary. And yet, Hanks manages to inject enough enthusiasm and bookishness that he really manages to make him a pretty well likable character, despite the fact we know virtually nothing about him except he likes books and he's kind of a symbologist, and that's about it. He's never really defined beyond that point. The direction, the editing, all top-notch, in that it also helps to keep the film relatively kinetic. It manages to help visualize and kind of dramatize this thought process as he kind of works through these things. And that was also the big strength of the Da Vinci Code as well, that you're taking a relatively cerebral attitude and making it very visual, which is at the same time what kind of the CSI shows kind of do. And actually, I thought I don't like CSI that much, but later. So my brother also complained that it kind of seemed like Langdon and the heroes are kind of spectators through this movie, where they're not really accomplishing anything, and in fact they don't seem to do all that much. They're just kind of watching these things go on, and had they never been involved in the plot, it would have turned out the exact same way. And with this movie, kind of hard to deny that. On the other hand, that's by design, and I don't know if I can call that a fault of the movie, because, and I'm going to get into spoiler territory here, the whole thing is kind of be designed to be seen by the heroes, but not really acted upon. I mean, we're talking about a really master plan here, this big super villainy overarching story that this guy must have been spending years coming up with, and so this most of the story here has been orchestrated for the, not the amusement, but for the purposes of having these guys watch it so they can testify what they'd seen. And so this whole thing has been written to distract away from what's really going on. So, yeah, these guys will stumble from one clue to the next just as they're meant to. They're being led by the nose. They're seeing exactly what they're meant to see. And so, yeah, they don't really accomplish that much. But I actually disagree with that idea that Langdon, I think, proves to be smarter than the plot most of the time. And even though he fails to save the people who are being threatened in this movie, for the most part, as he gets acclimated to the more intricate aspects of this mystery, he really does start to get ahead of the story a little bit, where he's getting to these places ahead of the deadline instead of chasing after the deadline and being there like 2-3 minutes late and things like that. It starts off that way where he's kind of behind the curve. He gets ahead of the curve later on, and even when he's ahead of the curve, there is this big assassin guy who is he's waiting for them to arrive, and so whenever these guys arrive, he's going to do his thing and kind of make his message. So the whole point of this thing is that a message is being put forward. Where else was I going with this? The story itself. I really got a kick out of this kind of, I can't deny that the whole Dan Brown thing is kind of ridiculous, but that's kind of the fun of it. And in fact, that is what makes this movie so exciting, and that's what makes this novel so exciting, is that they're not the best novels in the world. They're riddled full of plot holes. But he does these really interesting stories about relatively uncommon aspects of life, like in this case, like conspiracy theories, hidden symbology of the Catholic Church, conspiracies of Illuminati and things like that. things you don't often read that much about, or at least if not in the mainstream sense. I'm sure there's been a ton of Illuminati books and conspiracy books about the Catholic Church and things like that. But in terms of page turners, I think that really is carried across well here. I mean, this was an interesting movie. You wanted to see what happened next, and I got really carried away with the energy of it. And this is exactly the kind of Friday night matinee movie that's interesting. You'd go see, and whether you liked it or not, you were like, that was an experience worthy of seeing. I liked this one better than the Da Vinci Code. Now, the weaknesses of this plot there are, when you really start to think about it in hindsight, it does kind of fall apart, because it does fall victim, although it does this well. It falls victim to a number of literary and cinematic cliches. And I don't know if this is a bad thing about the story, but I had this figured out almost immediately. And that's not because I'm smart. It's not because I'm bragging that, look at me, I figured this mystery out. It's not. It's like, you can do this too. And the way you figure out so many mysteries of this type is you look for the character who is most helpful to the hero in the first act. Like either the best friend, or the guy who is very friendly, who does not seem to be a suspect, kind of the least likely type of guy. And the guy who is suggesting things for the hero to run around and do, or he's like, I'll check up on this for you, dude. And, he runs off. You can figure, like, it's pretty much that guy, the guy who is most helpful. Or, failing that, you can always try to find the guy who is being set up as kind of the patsy, or the most suspicious-looking guy. In this case, Stellan Skarsgård, who always seems to play the same kind of, like, really gruff and, like, lowbrow, gravelly dude who's very uncooperative, and I hate you, Langdon, you're never going to get access to the archives. And you're like, ooh, he's so smug and evil, I hate him. He must be the bad guy. He's not the bad guy. He's not the bad guy. They're setting him up for that, but he's not. So, of course, it's the really helpful guy, the guy who loved the Pope and would never see him harmed, and never, ever, ever would I do that. Of course, it's him. It's not the shady cardinal guy. It's this, it's Ewan McGregor, and his plan is kind of this really bizarre, labyrinthine scheme to usurp control of the Catholic Church, and he does this by, like, riddling the College of Cardinals with fear of this ancient enemy that's come back to fight him, and that's where the whole treasure hunty thing comes in. And in that way, I thought it kind of redeemed the whole treasure huntiness aspect of it, because it was meant to be a red herring. This whole time he's chasing these ancient clues, it was meant to kind of keep the Vatican police busy while he was doing his own thing and setting up this big coup of the Catholic Church. So it doesn't excuse the fact that it kind of slowed the movie down, and the clues themselves are kind of ridiculous. And at no point do these little treasure hunty things ever really seem plausible. But in this case, it wasn't really meant to be all that plausible. And what really falls apart about his plan is, and this is full on spoilers now, I know, but he's doing this thing where he's trying to raise the specter of the Illuminati. And in the past, the Catholic Church had this real crusade against heresy and science. And so, the Illuminati was this group of scientists and heretics who were really persecuted by the church. And so he's raising this fear that the Illuminati are back, and they're, like, acting as real terrorists who want to bring down the Catholic Church. And they've got this bomb made of antimatter, made of science, that's going to blow up Vatican City. And so he's got all the bishops shitting their pants, and a bunch of cardinals have been kidnapped. And these are the cardinals who are I forget their name, the Favorati or whatever. I can't remember. The guys who were responsible for mainly choosing the new pope. And that's, like I said, this was really fascinating, kind of watching the inner workings of the rules and the neat locations and stuff like that. But when it comes to the plot, he's using these loopholes against them, but at the same time, his plot relies a lot on a lot of coincidence and happenstance and things going just right, just in time for him to do these things. Now, for instance, he's going to kill off these cardinals. I mean, that's just going to happen. These cardinals are going to die. So he has these people killed. He hires a hitman to do this, and one wonders where he got the connections and the money to do this, and how he managed to wire up car bombs. Whatever. And so he somehow manages to steal this antimatter bomb and rig it up somewhere in the Vatican. And it's going to blow up. And so his whole plan relies on finding the bomb at the extreme last minute and then being able to take the bomb away and being able to run away with it where nobody will stop him or attempt to defuse the bomb, ahead of him. And he'll commandeer a helicopter, and the helicopter has to be waiting just outside in the square out in front of the Vatican, and he'll commandeer the helicopter because he can fly one. He's a helicopter. Oh, I knew they set that up. I just remember that. They do set that up in the movie where he explains where he was in like the Italian Army or the Italian Air Force, where he would fly rescue helicopters. So I guess they did set up the fact he can fly a helicopter. Stupid me. But he's going to take this bomb and he's going to stuff it in a helicopter. And this bomb has the equivalent of 5 megatons, so he's going to fly this helicopter way, way up. And then just in time, he's got the maximum altitude. He's going to jump out of the helicopter with a parachute. And he's going to... the bomb is going to explode 5 megatons and just fuck everything up, and then he's going to swoop in on his parachute, and he's going to be all beat up and branded by the Illuminati, but you know what? Everyone's going to love him, and they're going to vote him in as Pope, and just so many things had to go right for that to work. Langdon not figuring out that the bomb may be in a place with an artificial light source, maybe it's somewhere in the Vatican, right under our noses, and they're all surprised that it's right in the Vatican, and the thing is totally untraceable, and there'll be a helicopter right out front. There's so many things that it relied on to be effective. But again, for some reason, this movie had enough energy, and it had enough exotic locations, and the acting, everything was good enough that it kept me interested through the entire running time. Hey, and in comparison to so many other movies that bored the shit out of me, Angels and Demons was a page turner novel. It was a page turner movie that I kind of enjoyed, and I liked it enough that I kind of want to watch the supplementary features, not the ones that talk about the novel. I don't really care about the novel, but just to see the locations and kind of the intricacies of the Vatican and stuff like that. I don't know why it's just kind of cool. You never see that much about it. The second movie that he didn't like, changing gears abruptly now, was this Halloween movie that I watched a week after Halloween, that I probably should have watched before, was this movie called Trick or Treat, which I don't recall ever hitting theaters. It may have, but I don't think it hit theaters down here, but it seemed like a straight-to-video release. And I liked that one a lot, and Miles didn't like it that much at all. And I can see why, but at the same time, again, it wasn't a great movie, but it was interesting and entertaining enough to hold your interest basically through the entire thing. And I started to think about why that was. And I couldn't think of a real highlight of this movie. In fact, none of the stories were all that strong, but it was unconventional in a way, and it had a sense of humor about it, and it told the story in such a way that it was fairly interesting the whole time. And when I started to think about why that was, I likened it to kind of a series of Twilight Zone episodes, kind of an anthology of short movies, kind of Tales from the Crypt type stuff, but really good Tales from the Crypty type episodes. And it had that kind of humor about it, those same kind of twist endings, and when taken as a whole, it was pretty damn good. And like I said, I'll try to explain how the story is connected, where it's basically like a series of 4 or 5 short films that are kind of strung together on the premise that this is a particularly scary Halloween night in a town. And basically what happens is the movie starts off with a kind of an introductory sequence where this couple gets torn apart by some monster. And so, following that, the camera pulls back for a second and goes back in time and goes, before this happened, here's something else that happened that night. And so, it follows the story of some other people, like, for instance, there's a story with Anna Paquin, who is apparently, like, out with her girlfriends trying to find a date for Halloween. And, you know, along the way, the couple you just saw get torn apart kind of drifts through the story. And so, in that kind of Pulp Fiction-y kind of way, these 4 or 5 plots kind of interleave together to form one whole picture. And the movies are, the short films in themselves are fairly predictable, in the same Twilight Zone sense, where if you know there's going to be a twist coming, and after the first one you kind of know there's twists coming in most of these, you can kind of figure out where these films are going. And especially in the sense, like, okay, here's one. And this is not much of a spoiler, but there's a story about these, like, 4 or 5 kids who kind of bring the slower, this slower girl, I can't remember her name, along. And I think she's autistic or something like that. And so they're going to have fun with her a little bit, and they're going to pull this prank on her. So they take her out to, like, this quarry, and they tell her this ghost story about this insane bus driver who drove the bus off the cliff, and now the ghosts of these kids that he drove off the cliff are back. And, you know, they're going to, every night on Halloween, they race from their grave unless you appease them with jack-o'-lanterns. And so they're like, and the girl is like, I don't believe that at all. And they're like, oh, really? Well, why don't you go down in the quarry and, you know, we'll see about that. And so she's like, okay, if you go first. And so the kids go down, and of course they set up this prank for her. She goes down last, and they pull this big prank, scares the shit out of her, and gets her hurt. And all of a sudden it turns out that the story they were telling the story they were telling as a joke is real. And so all of a sudden they're in deep shit now. And so it's that kind of little twist where it's like, oh, now the joke's on them, huh? You know, and it's entertaining. You know, it's not bad, and I had a lot of fun with it. And where was I going? Oh crap! I had this train of thought and I lost it. But what was it? Anyway, I'll talk about. There's this kind of iconic character that's introduced in this movie. That is, I think in the movie they call him Sam. It's really lame, the name, but the look of the character was really iconic, but at the same time really funny. And maybe it's just I was just really being cynical about this one. You see this character who is kind of an ever-present figure in most of the stories. You know, just as scary shit starts to happen, you see this figure kind of appear, kind of like a scarecrow in the back of all these stories, or it just kind of walks through the shot, and you're like, who the hell is that? What is that? And this character only has a really active role in one of the last stories, where it attacks Brian Cox. And this character looks almost exactly like Little Big Planet's Sackboy. That, like, it looks like Sackboy, where it's kind of like, it looks like this kid in a Halloween costume, but has like this enormous head that's covered in like this burlap sack with these stitched eyes and this kind of stitchy frown. And, you know, like Sackboy starts tearing apart Brian Cox, who plays this curmudgeon-y old man, kind of like the Scrooge of Halloween. And that was one of my favorite stories, where he plays like this really Scroogey type character. And so Sackboy has this real problem. If you don't believe in the spirit of Halloween, Sackboy will own your ass. So I really like that story. And another thing you can call this character is Pumpkinhead. And I'm not being funny. This character is like, if you were going to call a character Pumpkinhead, this would be it, because the character has a head that's shaped like a pumpkin. And, you know, it's covered in burlap, but, like, at some point you see the mask taken off, and you can see what I mean. But even when Brian Cox manages to hurt the Sackboy creature, like, he shoots the character in the head, and sure enough, pumpkin shit flies out, and you're like, that's Pumpkinhead! It was, I don't know, it was one of the better Pumpkinhead movies I've seen. But, man, I wish I remember where I was going with that, I was saying something, but, yeah. Oh, I remember. I do remember now. I was going to say that this movie was actually, as I was watching, I was like, this is a really good kids Halloween movie. And I know that makes it sound like it's really immature, and I don't mean that. But I mean is, up until a certain point, this movie was scary without being unnecessarily gory or, having a lot of really sick imagery or like really intimidating stuff. It was like it was just scary enough where if I was like a preteen kid or 10 years old, something like that, I would have found this movie really, really like appropriately scary. It would have been like right in the butter zone for scariness without going like unnecessarily cruel, violent, over the top, gory. But then this movie does one really stupid thing, and I think it really detracts from the movie. It shows nudity, very, very brief nudity, but it's all of a sudden like you can't show your kids this movie. This is one of those movies that kind of reminds me of the books you used to read in like junior high, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, and those kind of books that kind of had those really short and sweet stories that had a little twist ending, or there on the door was a hook, and that was about as scary as it ever got. But in the terms of that short story, it was really effective. And if you were a kid, you saw this in the dark, you would think it was really scary. But now all of a sudden they got titties in this movie, and it's very brief. But I wouldn't, if I was making this movie, I probably would have recognized that this is actually a really good like kid or a date movie, something like that. And the titties contributed nothing, and it was kind of frustrating that way. And if I were to do a recut of that movie, like just that 0.5 seconds of titties, I would have cut out, and that would have been a really good family Halloween flick. And it's not often you can say that. Like, families aren't going to gather around and watch Halloween. Maybe they would. Now, like nowadays, Halloween might be kind of tame. But like slasher movies, like families don't get together and watch fucking Saw. This was that kind of Halloween movie that goes against what I was kind of saying before about how Halloween movies had to be scary or like really deep. This movie does what it does really well is it carries the atmosphere and spirit of the scary Halloween stories, but it doesn't do it in such a way that it's insulting or unnecessarily funny. It doesn't pepper the movie with really shitty, annoying character stereotypes who you're begging to get killed off. It's kind of gleefully evil. And there's a difference there. And it's in that regard, all of the little moments that it poses are kind of creepy little segues, like creepy little moments that when taken together, it was a really entertaining movie. I would suggest it. Nowadays, like it's past Halloween, it may lose some of its punch, but this is the kind of film you can see that would be a good TV show, that would be well suited for sequels. Like there, like I said, there wasn't really an overarching storyline except for like, here's a town where Halloween happens, and that's it. There's not really any continuity except for the Sackboy character, who is kind of sprinkled in through most of the skits. And that's kind of all I got. I've been hard at work. My work kind of stalled out a little bit. The one problem I've been having lately is my USB audio interface. That is, when I'm doing some voiceovers, I got this really nice microphone, and this is one of them. This is my lavalier microphone, but I've got this condenser microphone I use for voiceovers. Pardon me. And to connect to a computer, you have to have a USB interface, and my USB interface is a piece of shit. It wasn't always a piece of shit, but ever since I upgraded to Windows 7, it has now become a piece of shit. And it wasn't all that great to begin with. It wasn't all that compatible with Vista. Like, I had Vista when I bought it, so it wasn't even that great with Vista. But now with Windows 7, if I'm running the USB interface, nothing else will run. Like, I can't web browse, I can't word process. It will crash, like, everything except for my editing software. So when I'm working on that, that's all I'm working on. So I had to look for quite a long time to find an interface that is purported to work well with Windows 7, which is kind of uncommon. But that's what I've been up to. Been working really hard on Ripper. Been working really hard on another surprise movie that I'm sure you'll really like. And to tell you the truth, the movie I've been working on, I did not expect to take as long as it did. I thought I was going to bang this one out like right away. I thought this was going to be one of my 10-minute movie reviews. But no, this is it's a really really funny movie that I had a lot more to say about than I thought, and I actually had to cut out a bunch to not get ridiculous with the running time. I never like to go over really 20-25 minutes. Like any longer than a TV episode, I don't expect you guys to sit down for. And besides, like it can tend to get a little old. So with a review, 20-25 minutes, I'm in, I'm out, you know. So, but this is going to be a really funny one. I'm actually really loving the way this one's going. And like I said, this one was kind of when I was intending to be kind of almost like a filler episode where I was going to be like, here's a movie and this is really funny. But no, this one's really filling in. There's a movie that I'm kind of interested in that another one my brother rented called Thirst. That is funny, profound, and intensely erotic, according to Betsy Sharkey. If you don't know what this one's about, it's a vampire movie, and I'm really bored with vampires by now, if you can't tell. But the one saving grace of this one is that it is by Park Chan-wook, who is the director who did Oldboy, one of my favorite movies of all time. And if it's Park Chan-wook, I can almost guarantee you that this movie is going to be really, really fucked up. And so, if nothing else, it'll be worth the ride. And you know, believe it or not, you know how I always said like movies don't have to be good to be awesome. Sometimes there's a lot of directors out there who make movies that aren't always that good, but when you watch them, it's a ride. And so sometimes they're worth watching even if they're not that good, just for the ride of it all. Another guy who does that is Takashi Miike, who did Ichi the Killer and stuff like that. And in fact, he's one of my favorite directors, even though I don't like most of his films. But like every time I see a Takashi Miike movie that's new or whatever, I kind of have to see it. And it's just one of those guys where every time he makes a movie, it's one of those rides that you can't miss, whether you love it or you hate it. But anyway, I'm going to sign off for now, get back to work. No, this is actually not work. This is just me bullshitting about movies. I'm having fun. But yeah, go see Angels and Demons or go rent it. I had fun. I know some of you guys are kind of sticks in the mud about this kind of thing or really offended by the Da Vinci Code, but it's just a movie. Come on, man. It's better than National Treasure. And I even kind of like National Treasure, but whatever. Yeah, have a good one, guys.